I'd like to just kind of start off the conversation by introducing each of you and kind of what you do as a day job, and also how you've interacted with the OpenTF, now the OpenTofu project. Marcin, we've been already chatting a little bit before we started going live. So why don't you introduce yourself first to the folks who are watching?
Sure. My name is Marcin Wyszyński. I'm one of the co-founders of a project called Spacelift, which is essentially an infrastructure as code orchestrator. Been doing that for the last 3 years. Previous to that, I spent a couple of years as a cloud consultant. Previous to that, static code analysis startup. And even before that, I spent years and years at Google and at Facebook doing DevOps stuff. Actually called SRE at Google.
Gotcha. Okay. And how are you involved with the OpenTF project?
I'm on the steering committee. I was involved in discussing with different founders and different people in the community our approach and our strategy going forward. So I was there from the beginning, trying to facilitate a response from the community from different parties involved.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that community thing is going to come up a lot, because I think that's what it's all about, is supporting the Terraform community and the larger infrastructure as code community. Omri, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so my name is Omri. Hi, I'm actually based in Israel. I'm the co-founder and the CTO of M0. Like Marcin said, M0 is a platform to managing infrastructure as code. And we've been doing that in the past 4.5 years now. And previous to that, I managed various engineering team in various companies like eToro, Fiverr, and so on. Proofpoint was the last one. And I've been around cloud for a long time now.
Yeah, I feel like we're all old heads. And you're also involved with the OpenTF, well, now the OpenTofu project?
Yeah, so exactly like Marcin said, I was part of the founders from the get-go, and I'm also part of the steering committee. So again, like Marcin, we've been doing that for the past month and a half. So it's exciting times.
How about it? All right, and Jim, welcome.
Thanks very much. I'm Evgeny Berkman, also go by, excuse me, the nickname Jim. I'm one of the co-founders of Gruntwork, also the author of Terraform Up and Running, author of Terra Grunt and Terra Test and various other things in this terrific community. And with OpenTofu, also one of the members of the founding group and the steering committee, and the guy who yells at people a lot to be good and do things well.
Be good, do things well. Yeah, huge fan of the book, by the way. That's one of my favorite Terraform books, and it's one I recommend to people who are looking for a book to dive into. So thank you for that. And Terra Test, use it pretty often. So thank you for that
Very
as
cool.
well. So today's topic really is to talk about OpenTofu, its genesis, and where the project is right now, where it's heading. But first, let's kind of just start with a baseline question. Why OpenTofu? How is the project benefiting the larger Terraform community? And I guess I'll throw this to Marcin first. What are your thoughts on why it exists and how you see it benefiting the community at large?
Well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we build on the shoulders of giants, right? We are building on a very active community, work of thousands and thousands of people, both working commercially and non-commercially. So we are not starting from zero. We're starting from an amazing point of start, right? What I feel though is we have a chance here to build something to the benefit of that large community. This over years became the de facto lingua franca of the cloud. Pretty much the way people interact with cloud by default. I'll actually share a secret with you. I prefer reading Terraform provider documentation than actual APIs of clouds, because I get this really good understanding of like how things fall into place that I don't frequently get from especially APIs that I don't know very well. So for example, like I'm more an AWS guy. If I look at Azure, I do prefer reading their Terraform docs. So it became that sort of a standard, right? It's a very standard approach to the clouds, not only the cloud, but primarily we consume the cloud through it. And it's one of those founding technologies. Like if you think about what are the key components of the cloud, you'll think, okay, well, Linux, obviously, right? These days you might think Kubernetes, but Terraform will come very, very close. At least to me, Terraform would come very, very close. And so the fact that those technologies are or were open source is what drove that innovation. So what I feel we are doing with OpenTofu is we're carrying that. I still keep saying OpenTofu.
I know.
We're trying to carry that torch, taking it from people who carried it for these years very successfully, and carry that forward to make sure that this future is open and is shared and is actually a common future for the community.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Jim or Omri, do you have anything to add to Marcin's comments?
I think Marcin said it very well. I just want to add that we want the community-based features that a lot of people wanted, and in the past few years couldn't get through Terraform, and we would like to get like a lot of features and a lot of feedback from the community about how's this project's going to look like moving forward. And I think that's the essence of open source, and we would like to keep that going moving forward with this project as well.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'd double down on those 2 points. I mean, it really comes down to 2 things with OpenTofu. One, it's open. Open source matters, and the fact that it will stay open source matters, specifically for these foundational technologies where we're talking about thousands, tens of thousands of companies adopting them, not just companies, other open source projects, developers everywhere. They're foundational technologies, and your foundations should be stable. They shouldn't change. And imagine this nightmare scenario where some company could change the license of Kubernetes, and suddenly overnight, all thousands and hundreds, who knows how many nodes are out there. You owe somebody money. You have some kind of you have to check with your lawyers. Are we like still legitimate? Do we have to migrate out? Like that'd be chaos for the industry. It's unthinkable, unimaginable. And it's the same thing with Terraform. So it needs to be open source to be a reliable foundational building block for the modern internet. And then the second piece is exactly what Omri said, which is it's driven by a foundation. And so the interests that drive it are what the community needs and wants, not what a single vendor, a single company needs or wants. And the reaction to this has been amazing. I mean, the example I use a lot is end-to-end encryption for Terraform State, just to give you a really concrete one. Something that first, came up probably from day one, but there's an issue in the issue tracker from 2014. I mean, almost a decade now, and there have been dozens of issues open since, tons of PRs open since, not acted on it because secure state management is something you can sell. And that's great. And it makes sense from a business model, and it's completely within any company's right to do that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, if you're working on an open source project, you want to make sure that it's doing the right things for the project, especially when we're talking about security. And so things like that, we recorded a little video prototype of end-to-end encryption, and it got hundreds of thousands of views. People were like going crazy over like a terminal recording, which is pretty unusual. You don't see too many people running, a bunch of commands, and people are like, wow. And so people want this stuff. We need to make this tool the best that we possibly can. So that's what OpenTofu is about. It's open, it's driven by a foundation. And I think if you look at the history of tech, those 2 ingredients tend to lead to the best tools and products that are out there.
Okay. I'm going to say, so with the introduction of this project and almost a bifurcation, right, of Terraform versus OpenTofu, What are some potential drawbacks that you're thinking of when it comes to the folks out in the community with this sort of bifurcation and the potential confusion that could cause for anybody who's looking to adopt a tool today? And Jim, I'll put that back to you first.
I'm happy to jump on that one. I'll jump on that grenade. Anytime you have a fork, like a major fork of an open source project, that's not a great thing. Because what ends up happening is you kind of have this schism in the community. People have to take sides. And so you imagine the next CTO, VP of engineering, DevOps engineer, director, whoever it is picking the technology for their company. And now they're wondering, well, should I use Terraform or should I use OpenTofu? Which of these tools that I want to use with my company work with OpenTofu versus Terraform? Which of these third-party services? And it's just, it gets messy. You have to keep picking sides. You have to keep, you need like compatibility tables and charts. And at some point, people just start picking other technologies that don't have these kinds of breaks in the middle. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, that's the scenario we're in. HashiCorp released Terraform as open source. It was open source for 9 years under a very permissive license. It gives you this mental model of it's something that you can use for just about anything you want. And then suddenly, overnight, it's now under a different license, and that kind of breaks this implicit contract with the community. So really what we're trying to do with OpenTofu, to be completely honest, is just avoid the change. It's just keep it the way it's been for almost a decade now, and make sure people can keep using it. But we do now have this schism. What we're hoping for in the long term is that we end up merging everything back together to one project. If you look at like the Node.js history, I think Joint was running the project. Community wasn't happy with what was happening. Create a fork called IOJS. Fork starts going off in its own direction. Community follows the fork, and eventually the two projects merge back together as just back to the name Node.js. But now it's open source and community managed, foundation managed. So hopefully that's what will happen, so we don't have this schism forever. But in the short term, I think that's going to be the biggest drawback for everybody, unfortunately.
Sure. Omri, do you have anything to add to potential concerns for the community?
Yeah, I think we forget about the ecosystem that Terraform has. So, like Evgeny, they wrote TerraGrant and they have TerraTest, and there's a lot of community around Terraform, a lot of open source, a lot of tools for Terraform. And now when you create a fork, it's like a kind of war. And in war, you have casualties, and you need to pick sides sometimes. And you need to move away from tools that or you need to select one side of the other. And the ecosystem that was built around Terraform, we will need to adopt to OpenTofu. So there's a lot of drawbacks going to a fork. It's not the end of the world. We will do it, and it's not like something that we won't be able to do that. But it's like creating two different projects for the same goal, in my opinion. We're just, the consequences of what we're doing will have effect on the community and the ecosystem. And we believe that the ecosystem will go to the OpenTofu way because it's going to be open, because it's going to be open source, because like Evgeny said, you won't need to decide if I'll need like a specific vendor. Can I run it here? Can I run it there? What's the licenses about? But again, for the past 9 years, Terraform created a lot of ecosystem and a lot of tools around it that we'll need to adopt to OpenTofu moving forward. Again, it's not something that we can do, and I think we will do over time. But again, it creates, people are basically waiting to see what's going to happen and how the project is going to be and how transparent will be, how the features that will add to Terraform, to OpenTofu, basically. So, that's definitely a drawback, and they need to get confidence about features and about the project management, about the ecosystem that Terraform has. It's something that it's on us to deliver the promise that we are stating moving forward with this project. Because if we won't, I mean, we won't win. So I think we'll win this war by creating an ecosystem around that, being community-based, being transparent, being transparent with the roadmap, and delivering featuring that helps the community and helps whoever uses this tool. Unlike just a specific vendor, it's a community-based effort. That's my take on that.
Gotcha. Okay. And Marcin, I'm going to also pass the question to you if you want to make comments. And I'm going to tack on this question that came in through LinkedIn from Sam, asking, do you plan to maintain a migration path from Terraform to Tofu through its evolution? I feel it's to make a decision at this stage. So if you want to comment on just general concerns and then also on Sam's question directly.
Sure, I can do that. So I think both Jim and Omri were spot on. My feeling is that there's a lot of bad blood on both sides from supporters of both sides, and there's a lot of unnecessary words being shot at the other side. And that sucks because those people meet at conferences, those people be often working at the same companies. And I think it would be great if we could just sort of move on, like, what happened, and we just move on and stop throwing insults at one another, because it's not helping anyone, and it's just creating that schism in a community that was perfectly happy before. So I think there's a lot of responsibility on us in here and how we do our messaging, and this is what we control. What the other side does, we can't control. But if there's one thing I could ask the other side to do is to not fan the flames. That is something that we can do together for the community. As to the question about migration, so when OpenTofu launches, so we're going to be alpha probably next week and GA later this quarter, it will be a drop-in replacement. So we revived what HashiCorp created it's called equivalence tests. I think that they were in the sort of, I'm not sure how they were used. I think they were a bit abandoned, but we got them up and running again. We improved them to make sure that the artifacts like state, the plan, are identical between the two. So like we will be able to consume Terraform state, Terraform will be able to consume our state, and they both are going to be functional equivalents. There will be no migration path in the sense that it's going to be a drop-in replacement. Literally, if your code works with Terraform 1.6, it'll work with OpenTofu 1.6, and that's it. Will we maintain that going forward? Well, it's one of the things that the community decides, right? We will treat the compatibility issues as community-driven stuff. If the community wants a particular feature, they can say, okay, we want that particular feature, and then that feature might get prioritized accordingly. If it is something our community wants a lot, and they want to maintain that particular compatibility, then we will do that, and we will treat that very, very seriously. But again, it's something that the community decides.
On that topic of compatibility and one-to-one with Terraform, as Terraform itself changes and new features are added, I know that one thing that's in sort of the alpha notes for Terraform 1.6 is an update of the Terraform test framework. So that's something that's coming. Is the plan to mirror that functionality with OpenTofu, or is that something that you're going to leave up to the community to determine?
Do you want to answer that, Omri? Because you're probably the closest to this one.
I guess that you need to point out who do you want to answer that.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine, because I can take it. Yeah. So eventually, what we're doing is basically mirroring the same exact feature of test with 1.6. basically we created a fork from the latest MPL version of Terraform. So most of the code was already there. There were a lot of bug fixes and polishing that needs to be done, and a lot of tests on the testing feature that needs to be done, and we already implemented it and done it. And we believe that it's a matter of few weeks in order to have that feature built in with OpenTofu. And as Martin said, 1.6 will be a drop-in replacement, backwards compatible with any Terraform version, any state that you created with earlier versions, and that includes the testing feature. And again, as Martin said, moving forward, what features that Terraform will have if it's going to implement or get his way into OpenTofu is up to the community basically to decide. And if you see a feature in Terraform, you are more than welcome to submit an issue and an RFC to OpenTofu. So we, as a steering committee, will decide if that's something that the committee wants and it follows the rules and the vision of the project, and we'll basically implement that. Obviously, we cannot copy the code of Terraform. We'll need to implement that our own way, and maybe it will be a bit different. But it's up to the community basically to decide if we're going to implement those features and be forwards compatible with any other versions of Terraform moving forward.
Okay. Jim, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I think that covers it. Basically, just to summarize, drop-in replacement in the short term, community-driven in the long term. And the community can drive us towards compatibility or towards just new things that are not in Terraform that are only going to be in OpenTofu, like we mentioned, end-to-end encryption, things like that.
Okay. And a question came in through LinkedIn regarding Podman CLI gives an interesting approach where you can alias Podman to the Docker CLI. Will this be a path for the Tofu CLI? It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but if you're running Terraform 1.6 and then you switch to OpenTofu 1.6, you could do that alias and it would work fine. Future versions, that's still to be determined. Would that be accurate?
Yep, that's pretty much correct.
Okay, excellent. And we got another question that came in regarding how can I best advocate for the adoption of OpenTofu at my organization? I guess in this particular user's case, Kurt, he also has to deal with FedRAMP compliance. So how would you, if someone is interested in moving from Terraform to OpenTofu and they want to advocate for it at their organization, what would you have them say? What are some compelling arguments or some pros to jumping over? And if you know anything about FedRAMP and you want to comment on that, that would be good too. Jim, I'll throw that to you first.
Sure. Reasons to tell your boss to adopt OpenTofu. One, you probably don't need special permission from your legal team to use it because it's under a standard open source license that you're probably already using in a million places, MPL. Two, it's foundation driven, which means if something's not working for you, you can make a change. You can submit a bug, you can submit an issue request, you can submit a PR. If that's good for the community, it'll probably happen. And then three, over time, I do believe for that first two reasons, it's going to become the best version of this infrastructure as code platform that you're going to find anywhere. It'll be the most secure, have the most features, have the most folks, tools, vendors, experts built around it. So open source and foundation, that's really what it comes down to. As for FedRAMP, don't claim any expertise myself on FedRAMP. My understanding is you don't have like a tool per se that's, a CLI tool that's FedRAMP compliant or not. Your company can meet requirements for FedRAMP based on how you use the tools. Right now, OpenTofu and Terraform are going to be similar other than the license change. But as we start to add things like end-to-end encryption, then perhaps OpenTofu would make it easier for your company to achieve FedRAMP compliance. Not sure that's what you're asking, but that's what I would say on that point anyway.
Marcin or Omri, do either of you have experience working in a FedRAMP environment? Do you have any insight into that?
Yes, actually we do, but we do it as basically, I guess Martian as well as our commercial license, basically of N0, and probably Spacelift as well. But it's not related to the CLI itself. The CLI can run, within a FedRAMP environment or outside of it. It shouldn't be a problem. Like the Terraform CLI, it shouldn't pose a problem for FedRAMP. So I don't see any issues there. And again, we have some experience with customers of ours that are using FedRAMP, and it's usually the commercial or where you run your Terraform code, and not using Terraform as a CLI code or something that you run. So I don't see any issues with FedRAMP. And I have to say, regarding the first part of the answer, Martin and I were at the Open Summit in Bilbao just yesterday, and we asked the same question after we did like a technical session there. And I think exactly like Evgeny said, it's an open source, it's community driven. You would be able to be, put your own thoughts on what's going to happen. You can, submit an issue, submit an RFC. You can submit a PR. You can, do whatever you want as an open source project, and that's something. It's just should be a better suit for your needs moving forward. And another thing is just like we said before, it's a drop and replace. So basically, it's just changing. Instead of running Terraform init, just run Tofu init, and that's it basically. So it should be drop and replacement. So it shouldn't be a large or migration path that you need to work on moving forward with this tool.
Gotcha. Okay. A question came in, and this is something that I think a lot of people are concerned about, because such a big part of Terraform and now OpenTofu is the provider ecosystem. Like, without the providers, Terraform isn't all that useful, right? So, Marcin, what's going to happen with all these providers? Are they going to stay compatible with both versions of the software, or are providers going to have to choose one or the other?
That's a good question. The providers are effectively compliant with a protocol based on gRPC. The protocol is MPL, and providers will implement that protocol. Now, currently, there's no problem running providers with OpenTofu, and I don't foresee any issues going forward. It's a protocol compatibility, right? There's a few kinds of compatibilities you could be thinking of when you're thinking about like compatibility and interoperability, right? One is, do I produce the same, or can I consume the same artifacts? Can I talk to the same providers, or can I use the ecosystem? Last but not least, can I write the exact same code, right? The two first compatibilities are very important going forward, right? And this is how you maintain backwards compatibility. That importance is key for both us and legacy Terraform. Both have to work with older version of providers. You can't expect every provider to basically follow every change in your protocol. You have to support older versions of protocols pretty much indefinitely for years and years. With like what I might call the DSL compatibility, well, it doesn't exist even between legacy Terraform versions. Like, if someone been doing like 0.11 to the 0.12 migration, then 0.13 migration, like, you know what I'm talking about, right? So,
Sure.
so the DSL compatibility, that's been even broken between versions, and people say, well, yes, if you want progress, you're sometimes like you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. Some progress comes with some cost. And so new versions of Terraform will break that compatibility with their previous versions. But that's the least kind of important compatibility. Providers, key. Artifacts, key, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say the two big things are the providers and the way that state data is written out. And yeah, that makes it somewhat transferable between the two. Let's see. A lot of comments have come in. Let's see if I can
One
get caught
small
up.
thing just to add
Yeah,
on
sure.
that is
Go for it.
just to make it clear, the providers themselves, their license did not change. So Terraform Core switched license to BSL. All the providers stayed under whatever licenses they were, which were pretty much all open source licenses. So that's another very easy to understand reason why the providers will keep working just fine with OpenTofu, as they're still under the exact same open source license that they were before.
Okay. Another question came in. Are there plans to include features exclusive that, I guess what they're trying to say is, are there plans to include that features that were exclusive to Terraform Enterprise, Terraform Cloud, add those features into OpenTofu? I'm guessing that the answer is it's up to the community and the steering committee, but Omri, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things that Terraform has as something that is built in for Terraform Enterprise and Terraform Cloud is the remote applies and the remote backend, and that's an API that is not public. It's based only on the Terraform CLI, and it's not something that you can basically implement yourself if you want to. You have to do a bit of tricks and in order to maintain that and do that. And I think when I look at that, it's coupling two different features: remote state and remote applies. Those are two different features that were basically built in together with the Terraform CLI only to support Terraform Cloud and Enterprise. And to me, it sounds really strange that an open source will have a commercial specific feature inside an open source project. So moving forward, it will, as you mentioned, be up to the community to decide. But the way I see it, I think remote applies should be a feature within OpenTofu that is not specific to a specific vendor or a specific platform. It should be like an API that you implement, and if your server run this API and follow this API, you can run it wherever you want to, and not in a specific vendor. Same with remote backend. I mean, there's a lot of features. Again, they're coupled. The remote backend and the remote applies. And I don't see why it shouldn't be a feature that you just implement. And if you have a backend that supports that, you should be able to run it, and it shouldn't be specific to a specific vendor. But again, as you mentioned, it's really up to the community and up to the steering committee to decide, what should we prioritize there. And I think you see how are we thinking it shouldn't be favored of a vendor. It should be favored of the community, and how the features, and those are great features. Yeah, don't get me wrong. Those are great features, and we have a lot of customers, using them and wanting them. But I think it shouldn't be like a specific vendor that implements that. And obviously, when you do open source, you shouldn't be, doing something for a specific vendor. You should do it to the community, to everybody that can implement and use that. There's other things that I think are not done in that way in the CLI itself and Terraform. But those are like the two main examples that are, features that are dedicated to Terraform Cloud and Enterprise. And if you can look at the code, you will see a lot of implementation directed to Terraform Enterprise and Cloud. You'll see a lot of comments on them. You see it in the code itself. And when we think about open source, we don't think about it as a vendor specific solution. So that's my take on that.
Gotcha. Marsons, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I guess both guys were pretty much spot on. Well, some of the things that came to my mind is, like, as an engineer, when I was looking at how Terraform worked with remote backend and Terraform Cloud backend, my feeling was that there was a layering violation. Like, those things did not belong to the core, right? They were a part of a slightly different product. My feeling was that if I was building it as an open source product, I would define an interface. and then that interface could be implemented then by different vendors or open source products, right? The other thing that I'm thinking is like, what does it mean for a CLI to have enterprise features, right? It's a difficult situation, right? It's a similarly difficult situation of what it means to have a BSL license and a CLI, right? It doesn't fit that mental model. So my feeling is that the CLI should enable people to build those enterprise features on top of it. Maybe as the external services, be that commercial, be that open source, versions of those services, be that integrations with their open source, with their identity providers, that sort of thing, right? But should that be a feature of a CLI? I think the CLI should be more an enabler, a protocol definition, the owner of like, this is how you do it, and you implement it on your end, rather than trying to pack everything into a CLI, every possible vendor integration, every possible third-party integration that you can think about.
Mhm.
That would feel like a layering violation to me, and I think there would be easier ways of achieving that through enabling the ecosystem, enabling plugins and what have you, right? But we need to be quite specific on what gets into the CLI and what doesn't get into the CLI when it comes to like integrations with enterprise features.
Okay. And on that note, another question came in regarding, is it on the roadmap to make a platform like TF Cloud for Tofu? And I think that's a good question for Marcin and Omri, since you both are part of companies that are ostensibly doing something along those lines. So, Marcin, what's sort of the plan for Spacelift and embracing OpenTofu?
So we are a CI/CD platform that happens to be pretty good at Terraform, Pulumi, CloudFormation, and a bunch of other things, right? We are kind of not very opinionated on that matter. Our customers like Terraform. They also love Pulumi, but our customers like Terraform, and we want to continue supporting them and using any open source versions of Terraform, any open source versions of OpenTofu when that's GA. And we will give them that ability. We'll keep facilitating that interoperability. Beyond that, we are a general purpose CI/CD platform, so we will allow customers to run any extra software that they want as part of their pipelines, but we'll definitely not put them in any legal danger knowingly. Anything that we make them available on our machines, on our images, is going to be safe. MPL or Apache or
I see.
MIT,
So
yeah.
a customer could, in theory, host their own runners and have a newer version of Terraform running on that runner. And it's up to them to make sure that that is in licensing compliance with HashiCorp. But for your own images that you're running your runners on, for lack of a better term, those are specifically only going to run MSL or open source licensed Terraform and OpenTofu.
Absolutely, will not distribute anything that we know to be a potential legal risk to our customers. We'll also not knowingly execute anything that we know to be a legal risk to the customer. But they can be using third-party software on our system, and we don't police them if they don't have a Wiz license. We'll not police them into like buying a Wiz license. We'll not interface with Wiz to make sure that they have a license if they're using Wiz. It's third-party software. Like what we provide, we guarantee. What we don't provide, we can't.
Makes sense. Omri, did you want to add to any of that? I know M0 has a similar sort of solution to the Spacelift.
Yeah, so again, M0 is kind of the same in that sense. Our goal is to support any infrastructure code platform overall, and we also support Pulumi, CloudFormation, Kubernetes, and others. And for me, OpenTofu is another infrastructure as code framework that we want to support in our system. Obviously, we have an incentive to do that and make sure that our customer will move to OpenTofu and start using it. But as Marcin said, we are not gonna deliberately run any software that is not MPL or Apache or open source, basically. But we are general purpose as well, and you can host whatever you want on Azure as well. So so I think we're at the same spot here between us and Spacelift as well. It's obviously the same, but we are working on making OpenTofu available on the platform itself, and hopefully Terraform Cloud will do the same. I don't know, maybe they will.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Definitely can't speak to that
and I don't
myself.
have the roadmap of HashiCorp, but hopefully they will.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to kick one over to Jim because we haven't asked you a question in a while. I don't want you to feel like you're being left out. Marco asked about since OpenTofu has been adopted by the Linux Foundation, are you putting in place other safeguards? And he points out external board members or code maintainers to prevent potentially too strong of a direction steer by the initial group of OpenTofu initiators. Hopefully that all makes sense to you. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I think the best answer I can give to that is we are trying to not reinvent the wheel here with how to run a project. I think that's one of those like hard lessons every engineer eventually learns. You're like, I'll write the system from scratch. I'll do this from scratch. You're like, oh, it's really hard actually. Who knew? So it's the same here. We're trying not to reinvent, open source management from scratch. So we're trying to borrow practices from other Linux Foundation projects. We're actively chatting with a whole bunch of other open source folks. We are applying to the CNCF. So we're trying to use practices that have been adopted and successful for other projects. And as for the steering committee, we fully expect other companies to join, other folks to join in as new players basically start to adopt OpenTofu. So it's definitely not going to be the small same group that we started with. We very deliberately are explaining to everybody we are the initial folks. We have to get the thing off the ground, and this will grow and change. But yeah, that's basically the approach, is to try to use the foundation practices used by things like the Linux Foundation, the CNCF. We were actually browsing. CNCF was kind enough to publish a whole bunch of lovely templates on how to do steering committees and governance and things like that. So we've started to dig into some of that stuff. And so those are the practices we'll try to adopt. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, I think so. And on that note of, a small base building up to a larger project, writing code can be quite expensive and time consuming. And I've heard from various folks that getting up to speed on the Terraform code base can take several months. There's a lot in there. So I'm curious, what sort of resources are going to be dedicated to the OpenTofu project to ensure that good quality code is being generated and that the features that are being implemented are done well. And Jim, I'll kick that back to you briefly, and then we'll do a little round table.
Sure. Yeah. I guess there's a few questions in there. One is, what are the resources that are actually being dedicated to the project? So there's a bunch of companies that have pledged to fund full-time developers to work on OpenTofu. And at this point, I'm pretty sure the number of full-time developers that we will have is greater than have ever worked on any version of Terraform ever. So the resources are there. I don't know what the numbers are up to, 15, 20, something like that, but it's like a significant number of folks for years fully funded to do nothing but work full-time on open source, which is, by the way, like a dream job for many. So that's pretty cool. So the resources are there. This isn't just some, second, third job for all of us. Like we're busy, we got things to do.
Yeah.
We're making sure that the folks are there to work on this thing and make it a reality. A second question in there was around building the expertise in the code base. So some of the folks that are working on it have experience with the code base. Some are ramping up. Some of the folks that we will be hiring to fill those full-time slots will hopefully also have existing experience with working on it, so we're not starting from scratch. It's definitely not an easy code base. Nothing is. That's almost a decade old and has this many users. But this is precisely the beauty of open source. Terraform Core has had thousands of contributors. So thousands of developers, most of whom are not, core contributors that have worked at HashiCorp or anything like that. Thousands of people have figured out how to contribute to this thing. And so whoever it is on this future team that we're ramping up that has to ramp up, there's a way to figure it out. The docs are in place. The code is reasonably well written. It has evolved in the open, and that tends to make it easier. It's not, we've probably all had those jobs where you end up adopting that like proprietary code base that like one person wrote in the dark for like 9 years. That's hard. That is really hard to get into. No tests, no docs, no practices, no other human has ever even tried to contribute to it. That is hard. Terraform, credit to HashiCorp, well-managed project, actually very reasonable to get into. And I mean, the proof is just in the size of the community that has been able to contribute to it already. So I'm not too worried about that.
Okay, great. Omri, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I want to say, I believe, Marcin and Evgeny will agree on me with that it's not only developers that you need in order to maintain an open source project or any project. You need a product manager, you need a marketing team, you need a lot of things around, just building the software itself in order to make it successful. And, I'm sitting here next to a lot of people that have done it, and me included. We have a product team, we have an engineering team. We've done that before. We started from scratch, most of us, and we have a lot of knowledge in that specific domain. We've been doing that for many years now, on how Terraform works, our infrastructure as code work, the cloud works, our community works. Evgeny has TerraGrant, and they're maintaining that as an open source. We have a lot of experience in managing a project, and we have pledged, a lot of the companies pledged for full-time developers. I believe that it's not only the developers that we need to have, and then the Linux Foundation and CNCF brings you that infrastructure to manage a project. They have Kubernetes, they have Istio, they have OPA, they have a lot of tools that are managed for a long time, and with their experience on how to manage those open source and our familiarity with the domain, with Terraform, with infrastructure as code, that I think gives you a lot of confidence that this project will be successful moving forward. And again, it's not only developers, it's not only the code itself. I think it's not something that you should take light in consideration of that. But it's not only that; it's it's a project, and you need to maintain it as a project. And we have the resources. We have like a bunch of companies that are pledging to invest time, money, and resources into making OpenTofu successful. So I think with our expertise, with the Linux Foundation, with the CNCF moving forward, we have the experience to do that successfully.
Excellent. Thank you. And Marcin, I'm going to pass it over to you as well, and also add on, what does the current roadmap look like for OpenTofu? When can we expect to see a release people can get hands-on with?
Sure. So a couple of questions here, I suppose. First of all, the code base, it's not that complex. Like we dedicated a team of 6 people to it, and obviously the core of that was to get OpenTofu to a state where we can release. But we also started. Basically, we did a hackathon here in the Warsaw office in Poland where people could pretty much chip away at the edges. Like, okay, go and implement your crazy idea in Terraform. What is the feature you'd love to see, right? The demos that Jim was mentioning before, that was one of my team leads basically evening work. Like literally, he did 2 demos of the evening, right? So it's like, it's not an easy code base, but it's a handful of key concepts that if you get right, everything falls into place. And generally, engineers can understand abstract concepts pretty well. So I think you can be pretty productive in the code base within the first couple of days. Obviously, you will need to learn the best practices. You'll need to get a feel for what it means to build a production feature in that, to understand there's a lot of like complexity involved in how people run it. But overall, it's not a crazy code base, and it's built on a few well-defined key concepts that you need to understand and then move on. So like you could be very productive. Things that people built during that hackathon were so impressive. Like, backends as plugins, functions running in Terabyte, custom defined functions. Was it production code? No. Would I want to show it to the community? No. But could they do it? Yes. Yes, they could. And so people can be very productive in that code base within a limited amount of time. So I wouldn't worry about it, and hopefully we can get some people who contributed to the legacy Terraform in the past to contribute to OpenTofu as well. I see no reason why they wouldn't. So on to next question about the roadmap. The roadmap has a big item, or two big items. One, get alpha into the hands of people. What is the blocker for alpha is the registry, the Terraform OpenTF registry. I'm not sure if you know what happened, but HashiCorp changed the registry terms and conditions to prevent anything other than HashiCorp Terraform from using the registry. So if you use the registry with like a fork of Terraform or OpenTofu, you will be running afoul of terms and conditions. This is not what we want to facilitate, right? We need to build our own registry, and this is effectively having a good working registry is a prerequisite for what we might call an alpha version. And this is hopefully next week we're going to be able to say, yes, we did it. By the way, the registry is open, so you can see the work on the registry happening in the open. People are discussing different approaches. It is working. We're load testing it. We're figuring out some corner cases, but it's so far so good. We're on track. Obviously, the next big step is the GA, right? Mm-hmm. For GA, we need to make sure that we are on board with how we do the provider registry, that the community is happy with how it works, that it's stable, that it's a drop-in replacement in terms of both functionality but also stability and performance. So we need to make sure that there is no regression if you switch from legacy Terraform to OpenTofu, and that's going to be a lot of testing, I suppose. And we know that the community is very eager to help us, and so after we open the gates on the alpha release, well, we hope to be able to ship within the next weeks, within the same quarter, essentially. Beyond that, there are some items on the roadmap that are like long-standing things coming from the community. So end-to-end state and plan encryption, obviously that's a big one, right? Some of the things that people have brought up is maybe an alternative way of working with providers. So could we disseminate them as OCI images? Could we make it easier to work with private providers? Because people have been struggling with that big time. And as Spacelove, we benefit from that because we can sell you a private provider registry. But yes, as a user, you'd love to be able to use it more intuitively and more easily without having to pay someone for the privilege, right? But again, these are community-driven requests. And so once we go GA, we're going to be having a big review of the RFCs.com, big review of what the community wants, and we'll try to, with the community, build a roadmap for the next couple of months.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to be selfish and pick one of my questions. So probably the biggest question in the average practitioner's mind is, I just need to get stuff done, man. Like Terraform works for me today. I don't think I'm impacted by the licensing change. Why should I switch over to a different project if this is working for me today? So Marcin, what would you say to that average practitioner who they just need to get stuff done?
Okay, a couple of things. Yeah, if it works for you, don't change it. So I'll give you a bit of data from my Space Explorer. About 1 in 8 people uses the newest version of Terraform. And probably only because we make it the default. So when you create a stack, we give you the newest version. I actually run the numbers of what the most stacks are running. It's 0.14.8.
Wow. Okay.
Right. Do I need to change anything? Well, if you don't need to change anything, then don't change anything, right? Stay with that. What I think, though, is if you don't care about the license, if you care nothing about OpenTofu, I think the very existence of OpenTofu should be of benefit to you, because first of all, it's an insurance policy. If things go wrong in the Terraform world, whichever way, there's an alternative you can jump to. Some people are like, oh, it's a great news for the likes of Pulumi, because now people will be jumping to Pulumi. And I love Pulumi, by the way. They're lovely people. It's a fantastic technology. But if I have tens of thousands of lines of Terraform written, and I go to my boss and say, license, I need to change to Pulumi, I'd expect my boss to be like, really, is that how you're bringing value, right? So this is an insurance policy. If you're happy with what's currently happening, if you're comfortable with that, stay with what you have, but be also aware that someone's got your back. The other bit worth mentioning here is it's like open standards generally win in the end, right? And over time, you'll probably see more people talking about OpenTofu. You'll probably see people using exciting features from OpenTofu. And maybe one day you'll say, well, that end-to-end state encryption or whatever other feature is a good enough reason for me to switch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you switch. And the third bit is it's good to have competition, right? It's like competition is what drives innovation, is what keeps people on their toes and keeps them delivering. So perhaps if nothing else happens, maybe the service that you get from your current original vendor is actually going to improve, right? Because there is that alternative on the horizon, and someone is effectively making that alternative earn its keep, I suppose.
Excellent. Omri, I'm going to pass that to you as well. And I want to make sure I get time for everyone to answer this question. So we might go a minute or two over, if that's okay.
Yeah, I try to make it fast as possible. I totally agree with Marcin. Basically, if you need to upgrade, I wouldn't do it right now. I would stay on 1.5. We have to consider 1.6 is not out yet. There is no a version that is BSL yet. It's going to take some time. They're currently in beta, so it's going to take some time before a GA will be there. So my recommendation is just not upgrade right now and see what's OpenTofu will be like, and if you want to make the switch, if we'll become a better alternative, if we'll have better features, if we have better support, if you will be able to contribute to the roadmap, and you will see that happening, that's where you need to decide if you want to move away from Terraform to OpenTofu. Again, and another thing is that you're dependent on a vendor, which with OpenTofu you're dependent on the Linux Foundation, the CNCF project, which to me, if I was somebody that needs to decide which version or which framework I want to put my my soul and heart and resource on, I would go with that moving forward. But I'll make it swift and have Evgeny also have time to answer that.
All right, Jim, your thoughts?
I think if you are an average developer, you're working somewhere, you don't have to worry about license, et cetera, et cetera. The reason you should still be a fan of OpenTofu is the following. One, it's probably going to have the actual features you care about. not the ones that one vendor allowed or didn't allow, but the ones the community asked for and you got. Two, one of the beautiful expressions, and I forget who said this, so if somebody remembers, please let me know, is that they defined open source as the work you can take with you between jobs. And I think that's going to be the beauty of something like OpenTofu is whatever work you're doing, whatever tools you've learned, whatever skills you've developed, you're guaranteed more or less that you'll be able to keep using it with OpenTofu in the future. That's what's nice about an open source, truly open source project. Three, it'll be embedded into everything you're using. All the other tools in the ecosystem will support the open one. And four, it's a community, right? If you want to give back, you're probably going to want to give back to the open source thing, not the proprietary, non-open source thing. So that's the reason to go with OpenTofu. It's open. It's open, and it's got a foundation behind it.
I know I said that'd be the last question, but quick follow-up to that. If folks are interested, they do want to get involved in the community, what's the best place for them to go and get more information, Jim?
The OpenTofu website, there's a how to contribute thing right in the nav. So take a look at there. That has very clear instructions on what you need to do. And the TLDR is basically submit issues, submit PRs. The repo's out there. It's open source. You can start contributing now. And we'd love to see that.
All right, awesome. Well,
just also a Slack channel, community Slack channel,
Thank you.
a workspace actually. So there's a link on the website if you want to contribute. There's I don't know, I think 1,000 members already on the workspace, and I opened it like a week ago. So yeah, so that's another way to communicate with the steering committee, with the community itself, with everybody, the developers on that, and then everything else will be on GitHub, basically on the repo itself.
All right, fantastic. Well, Marcin, Jim, Omri, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing all this information about OpenTofu. Hopefully everyone has found it very useful information. And that's going to do it for today's stream. Thank you, everybody who tuned in. And for those who are watching it later, thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time. Until then, stay healthy, stay safe out there. Bye for now.